Hello, North Carolina. I know you've just gotten thrown into this whole mess of the pesticide immunity battle, but here we are, and I'm here to give you an update about everything that's been going on so that you can wrap your head around it, because it is a lot to take in. My name is Dr. Alexandra Munoz. I am a molecular toxicologist, and I have been involved in fighting this pesticide immunity legislation in some of the different states where it's been proposed this year. And I'm here to tell you first and foremost that this is going to be a fight, and we are going to need you to keep showing up in order to get this taken out of the legislation. Now, what you need to understand is that this isn't a normal piece of legislation. This piece of legislation is being backed by major corporations, including Bayer and ChemChina, companies that sell pesticides and herbicides and want to continue selling their products without any type of health warnings on the labels, even when those products should have those warnings based on the scientific data that's been published in peer-reviewed literature. So that's the background here. Now, what you may not know is that they've been pushing this legislation across the country this year. North Carolina is not the first state to face this. At the beginning of the year, they submitted bills, they had representatives submit bills on their behalf in North Dakota, in Idaho, in Wyoming, Montana, Missouri, Mississippi, Iowa, Florida, Georgia, and maybe there's another one. But the point is that they have been going very aggressive trying to get this legislation passed. And they did get it passed in North Dakota. The governor signed it into law a few weeks ago, and it also passed both houses in Georgia. And it's been sitting on the governor's desk and will probably get signed into law soon. So this is no joke. This could happen in North Carolina, and that's why we've got to stop it. Section 19 of SB 639, which is the state's farm bill, is the piece of legislation that outlines this immunity clause for the pesticide manufacturers. Now, Section 19 applies to more than 15,000 chemicals. That's a lot of chemicals, and also a lot of companies that produce those chemicals. Section 19 also applies to all future chemicals. So anything that anyone in that space wants to bring onto the market will now immediately get the terms of Section 19 once it's passed the EPA process and once it's passed the North Carolina Pesticide Board process. So as a toxicologist, that is so alarming to me, because this is a huge set of chemicals that is essentially designed to kill things, and that has been proven to be very harmful to human health. We have seen endocrine disruptors come out of this class of chemicals. We've seen brain damage come from this class of chemicals, and we've seen cancers come from this class of chemicals. They also can damage fertility. So these are by no means inert chemicals that should just be granted immunity. These are very dangerous chemicals that need to have the proper labels on them that warn people about the actual health impacts of them, but they don't. And that's because the EPA approval process is based on a piece of legislation referred to as FIFRA, which is the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, Rodenticide Act. And under FIFRA, companies are asked to submit their own data to the EPA. And that's really not a great idea when you're regulating such a dangerous set of chemicals. So it turns out that many of the companies structure their studies and their data in a way that allows them to avoid reporting the really dangerous parts of that data, because they don't want a label that says this may cause cancer. And the EPA has done a very bad job of regulating that process, and they allow the companies essentially to submit the data that they want to submit. And so it's a very broken system. But Section 19 is going to make it a lot worse, because Section 19 is going to prevent failure to warn lawsuits. Now, what that means is that if you or someone in your family is harmed by one of these products, if somebody gets cancer, let's say, and it's the exact type of cancer that the product that you used all the time is known to cause, you won't be able to file a lawsuit against the company. And nobody in your family will be able to file a lawsuit. And that also applies if, let's say, your land is damaged by a new pesticide that comes out and it just destroys your land. You won't be able to sue the company. Or if kids at a school are exposed to a new pesticide and 20 or 30 years from now we find out that they're infertile, nobody will be able to sue the company. So this essentially removes the last mechanism of recourse that people have when they've been harmed by a product, but it also removes the last mechanism of accountability that is on the companies in this space. And they really need a mechanism of accountability because we've learned from Monsanto and other companies what they're willing to do to get an EPA-approved label that doesn't list any health harms on it. And what they're willing to do is manipulate the data, falsify studies, intimidate independent scientists, pay scientists to ghostwrite papers on their behalf, flood the research with irrelevant data. They are willing to do so many things to twist the truth so that people are still confused about whether or not glyphosate-based herbicides cause cancer. Well, I'm going to set the record straight for you right now. Glyphosate-based herbicides are carcinogenic, and they do cause non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and there is a lot of evidence to support that. And the people who have filed lawsuits against Monsanto have a valid scientific claim to make. They also have a valid claim because Monsanto intentionally hid that information from the public for decades, and they intentionally suppressed the data going to the EPA that would require them to list that on the label. And in fact, Bayer, the company that now sells glyphosate, is still doing that. The label is still not updated, even though so many people have been hurt by this type of product. So this is really unacceptable in my mind that this piece of legislation is even being proposed, but the idea of it passing in yet another state is unacceptable to me. And so I want to help you understand everything that you can about it so that you can take an active role in contacting your legislators and using your voice to ask for this to please be removed from SB 639. So that's an overview of what's been going on. And there's some trickier things happening in North Carolina with the way the language of this legislation is written. So in the other states, they've been changing the language a lot in order to try to keep tricking legislators and people that it's not actually giving them immunity. And I bet if you call some of your representatives or senators and talk to them about this, they're going to tell you, well, it doesn't actually give these companies immunity. But it does. It gives them something called de facto immunity. So even though it's not saying it's giving them immunity, the way that the language is structured and the way that it references the label effectively gives them immunity. And in North Carolina, it's a bit trickier to explain because they've also added something called a rebuttal to the whole thing, where you can rebut the presumption that the EPA label is sufficient, which is what's blocking the lawsuits from happening, by providing a certain weight of scientific evidence that in the peer-reviewed literature, we've seen that this and this causes this, and now you can rebut the presumption and you can file your lawsuit. Well, first of all, that sounds great, but it's not actually great at all. It's an impossible standard that they've set up because, number one, the weight of scientific evidence doesn't exist as a thing in science. There's no way to standardize that or measure that or prove that to anybody, so it's another place where them and their lawyers can get things the way that they want. But also, the standard of proof that they've set up is actually higher than what's required by the EPA, because the EPA is not requiring the companies to submit peer-reviewed data. They're just submitting their own data. So the whole thing is a big mess. Section 19 needs to come out in its entirety. We don't want an amendment to it. We don't want any version of it. This is designed by these companies to get immunity, and any language that ends up being in there is going to do the same thing. So we've got to fight it, and you've got to stand firm on this with me. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll try to answer them for you. But Section 19 is bad news for you, for your families, for farmers, for all of North Carolina, and it's especially bad news for future generations because it applies to all future chemicals that are going to come onto the market, which means that once companies know this is in place, they know that they won't be able to get sued for anything that they bring onto the market, so it will give them the space to bring things that might have been a little bit too dangerous to bring before. And instead, now they don't have to worry about it. They can just bring whatever they want onto the market knowing that they won't get sued for it. Is that something that you want? Is that something that your family wants? I don't think it is. And so that's why we've really got to fight this one. I know we can do it, so let's stick together, everyone.